Hello, I'm Ellen Knight, and I'm here with Lois Ryan talking about the Kill the Bill protests that took place in Bristol over the last week.
Hi, I'm Lois Ryan. I'm in my first year of studying English and philosophy at the University of Bristol, and I was one of the attendants at the Kill the Bill protest on Sunday in Bristol last week.
So, for the people listening, can you expand a little bit on what those protests were and why they were taking place?
Okay, so the Sunday protest was a protest with no organiser in Bristol city centre against the police crime and sentencing bill, which Priti Patel was trying to rush through Parliament, which has now been pushed back until July. But the bill itself was problematic in a number of ways. The main reason that most people are protesting against it is because one of the clauses within the bill allows for police to shut down any peaceful protest at any time for pretty much any reason that makes it disruptive. And the attendants at that protest can face up to 10 years in prison. Well, including for statutes facing and things like that. But yeah, any peaceful protest can be criminalised, and anyone who attends a peaceful protest is at risk of facing a prison sentence. And that's what that protest was against, our right to peacefully protest.
Yeah, so just to specify there, as per the bill, the new bill, if it passes, protests have to have a start and end time, there's noise limits, and these things can be imposed upon any demonstration, so even if it's just one person. And I think there was another aspect of why some people were there, and that the bill plans to strengthen police powers to tackle unauthorised encampments, which will target traveller, Roma, Gypsy people if they decide that the police decide that they don't want them there, they can move them on. And I think I'm right in saying there were people there protesting the same thing.
Yeah, a lot of people there protesting that because it essentially criminalises them in a way that hasn't been done before. So as you're saying, any Gypsy Roma traveller communities can be targeted, and like you can face a prison sentence for just being there now, which has never been a thing before. So you're right in terms of the demonstrators were predominantly composed of people protesting against that, and then the aspect of the bill that criminalises peaceful protest.
And yeah, you mentioned the toppling of statues. So yeah, there's
Yeah.
10 years in prison for damaging memorials. So in Bristol, obviously, that's a very hot topic, seeing as back in June, the slave trader Edward Colston's statue was thrown into the river. Do you see like any parallels with those Black Lives Matter protests and the one that was happening on Sunday?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think a lot of people were feeling like the bill that's being pushed through. I mean, Priti Patel herself has admitted that it's in response to the protest last summer with Edward Colston's statue and all of that. So everyone in Bristol who's so like, I wasn't there last summer, I only moved during the time of uni, but everyone there in Bristol who was like so proud of what happened last summer, like it was such like a community thing, like everyone was so happy about it. Well, obviously like the majority of people, obviously there's opposition. But it is kind of a direct attack towards those people because it's like everyone's done this thing that they see is really, really good. And then the government's like, no, we're going to make sure there's a much heavier sentence for that again now. Like it is exactly in response to what happened. And it feels very much like an attack. So yeah, there's definitely a big feeling of that there as well.
And like, as specifically as a university student, how important do you feel like free speech and your right to protest is, specifically in like your campus and the surrounding area? Do you feel that takes particular precedent for you?
I'd like to distinguish between free speech and right to protest, because I do genuinely think they're talking about very different things. But in terms of right to protest, I definitely say that's one of the most important things. Like, you don't really, like, you can look at hundreds of years in history and see how important protest is, especially within the student community. And anything, like, it's something that affects everyone, but students, like, going to uni, it's very much a, like, political awakening kind of thing for a lot of people. And for a lot of people, it's time to get into things like protest. So to take that possibility away from students removes like a significant amount of power within the population, because you are essentially getting a group who are politicized at this point and who make a significant difference at this point, and you're taking that opportunity away from them. So even though the bill itself doesn't target students in any way, in the effects of the bill, if it does get through, I definitely do think we will notice a lull in terms of like the momentum, the frequency and things like that of protests. And then as a result of that, we'll notice a lot in kind of like the political pushing back in certain areas, because we won't have those protests there.
And you were saying you wanted to define right to protest versus right to free speech. How would you differentiate between them?
I mean, often when people say them, they'll be trying to get at the same things. But I think in terms of the way those two terms are used at the moment, so not actually what they're supposed to mean, but at the moment, So right to protest is obviously just right to protest against anything that goes on, and everyone's protesting for different things, so that term could be applied to everyone. Free speech at the moment is not always, but it is often used in order for people to feel happy expressing things like hate speech, which isn't the same thing. Like free speech is about everyone being able to have their opinion, say their bit, blah, 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 blah. Hate speech is very different, and we do need to be cracking down on hate speech at the same time. So I just want to make sure that like I'm promoting freedom of protest, not freedom of hate speech. But yeah.
And do you think students, especially on campus, do you feel that your right to free speech and your right to protest, as they exist obviously in separate spheres, do you feel that you have those rights protected?
I mean, personally, yes, at the moment. I haven't personally had an issue with either of those. Obviously, the government have come up with the response to free speech in terms of trying to restrict universities. Well, no, the government have said that universities have been restricting free speech, which is their reason to now say that they're going to make sure that universities don't restrict free speech. And I recognise that some people might think that is a genuine concern, and I don't want to invalidate that. But I do think there is definitely something to say in terms of the government choosing to try and find something that they can kind of make into a problem and then see like they're addressing it, when actually what we see at universities is there are so many problems, political and otherwise, that they could be addressing at the moment. And like it seems very tactical for them to move in on this one thing, which is going to have a huge impact on like academics and professors and people like that, and then not actually have that much of a positive impact otherwise, because it's not that big of a problem in the first place.
Yeah, so just to clarify there for anyone who's listening, Gavin Williamson, back in February, he's unveiled the plans to enable people who've been non-platformed at universities to sue for compensation due to free speech infringements. And the Department for Education has said that there have been unacceptable numbers of students and academics who feel unable to express their lawful views without fear of repercussion. Now, this has been quite heavily criticised, namely by the University and College Union, or UCU, which, like Lois has just said, it's fighting phantom threats to free speech when there are more important things like the reaction to the COVID crisis at universities that are more pressing right now. And again, it's been criticised, well, back in 2018, in fact, a report by the Parliamentary Human Rights Committee did not find the wholesale censorship of debate in universities. It's a very hot topic, and as you say, there's been a lot of criticism of it, in that a lot of people think that the government is sort of fighting something that isn't there, as you've already said. And have you encountered any examples at your university of people being no platformed or similar?
No, but I don't think that's like because there's not things going on. I think that's genuinely a result of COVID, because we haven't had any speakers invited in or anything like that. But like the cases of no platforming and things like that, like my personal view, if I can say, would be that it's not a case of like restricting free speech. Like, and the examples that Gavin Williams recited as well, like there were of certain people who there's been protests against them coming into the university, and then they'd come in and given their speech anyway. Like they were still actually allowed to say what they said, even in examples where some of it included like hate speech and hate rhetoric and things like that. The fact that he's actually citing examples in which that wasn't the case anyway kind of shows how much of a no problem he's made it look like, which definitely does reflect the reality in terms of within universities, it does not seem like that big of a problem, especially that's my personal experience. But yeah.
Bearing in mind these plans to like protect free speech, which Gavin Williamson thinks is being infringed upon, do you feel there's a bit of a dissonance in governmental attitudes towards people's rights to protest and their rights to free speech? Because you've got the Police Crime Sentencing Courts Bill, which is to impose limits on protest, but at the same time you've got Department for Education saying people are unable to express their lawful views. Do you feel that there's a bit of a disconnect there?
Yeah, and I think it's really important that we look at why that is, because that's not like a small disconnect that we should be brushing to the side. I think we should all be looking at that disconnect and see exactly what's going on. And I know that anything we say right now is going to be speculative, and it's not, we can't take any facts from the media because no one's actually talking about it in an important way. in terms of from the government, everyone else is. But yeah, in terms of the reasons, we need to look at the reasons why they're doing things like that, in terms of obviously, if they actually want to protect everyone's right to free speech and they wanted everyone's opinions and everything, then they wouldn't be restricting the freedom to peacefully protest. Like, we need to very much look at why they're making the moves they are, to make sure that speakers can't be banned in universities, whatever their views, so people are free to spread like hateful views and things like that within universities, but you're not allowed to protest against like hateful things or anything like that. Like, we need to very much look at the areas of society that are being impacted by the different things they're pushing through, and read between the lines in terms of it is very clearly not a promotion of freedom of speech, because otherwise this other bill wouldn't be going through as well. Like, they're in direct contradiction with each other, and we need to be looking at why that is and actually talking about that, which a lot of people are doing, but obviously the government aren't, and we just need to get pressure up.
And given, I suppose, the sort of history that students have with protests, student protests is something I think that has been going on for years specifically. Do you think there was was there a high proportion of students there protesting?
Yeah, there was a huge, really high. To hazard a guess, I'd say maybe like 20-30% ish as a complete guess, or at least they were of student age. Like, there were a lot of students. Everyone I know went, like, yeah.
One last question. The student voice, specifically in places like Bristol, which has a high student population, also places like Birmingham, which has, again, a very high student population. How important do you think the student voice is to opposing major government reform like the police crime sentencing and courts bill?
I think if students didn't do anything, no one would really notice, no one would really say that much. Like, I think it's one of those things where it is what you make of it. Like, if students don't do anything, these protests will carry on regardless, and a lot of people will be in opposition. But if like half the students in the country were to come together and oppose this, it would be immeasurably more effective, because the amount of effective opposition that students could build if they all came together in opposition to this bill would be huge. You see things like Extinction Rebellion are hugely student dominated, and that's how they get so much done, because it's literally just sheer quantity of like people who come together with similar political views and like a drive to get something done. And if we were to kind of get that across the whole student population of the UK, it would be huge. So if enough of us come together and work together, then we might actually be able to get somewhere with this, and that's what I'm hoping for.
Thank you so much there, Lois, for talking to us about your experiences and your thoughts on the Kill the Bill protests in Bristol. And that was Ellen Knight reporting for Redbrick News.